In this video, we're going to talk about CI/CD for API documentation. So continuous integration, which is CI, or continuous deployment, which is CD, are both considered best practices in software engineering. It's a pretty common thing to do for software, but we can also do this to our API documentation with GitHub Actions. Pretty easy to do. I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. For continuous integration, what we can do is set up a GitHub action that is going to run the Redocly CLI lint rules on every PR crate. So those rules will automatically run and there'll be a quality gate for our API documentation. So very, very good thing to do. It's just like testing software, where we want to run all our tests before committing a PR. This way, we can do the same thing for our API documentation. And then for continuous deployment, the software world, that gets pretty tricky as far as handling continuous deployment. There's a lot of organizations doing it. That takes a big commitment to testing and code quality. API documentation, it's much simpler. What we can do is host our Redocly API documentation on Github Pages, and we can set up a GitHub action so that when we commit to the main branch, we'll automatically update our GitHub pages with the latest API documentation. And I'll show you exactly how to do that in this video. Okay, what we want to do is first we want to go ahead and create a branch for this. So I'm going to come in here, say create new branch. I'm going to call it GitHub Actions like so. I'm going to say create and switch to that branch. So we'll be working off a new branch. And now I'm going to come over here to source control. And under GitHub, I'm going to create a new directory. We'll call that workflows. And this is the standard directory for GitHub Actions. Now let's go ahead and we're going to set up our lint action. So that's going to be API lint YAML. And we can say here name. Say on. Now the next section of the YAML file is going to be our jobs. I'm going to say build. Runs on. And that's not what we want. Copilot's getting this drastically wrong. I do want a Ubuntu latest, but I do not need all this. Checkout actions, I think it's up to version 4 currently. Now we're going to say name setup node. And node might actually be included in the Ubuntu latest, but I want to make sure that we get this set up properly. And I'm going to say version 4. And Copilot's bringing in some extra noise that we really don't need on this. Say run lint tests. I would say Redocly lint. Just going to double check that. Redocly lint / that tells it the current directly, so that just double checking this all looks good so far. So when we create a pull request, this is going to run that. And this Redocly lint, this tells it to format for a GitHub action, and I misspelled that. Now let's create a second workflow. This will be for commits to main. So come in here, say new file. So build and deploy API docs. That is actually correct. Thank you, GitHub Pilot. And Copilot picked up exactly what I just did, but that is not correct. I'm going to use a local shell script called make.sh, which we'll define here in a minute. Now we also want to do so you're going to have to set up in the secrets inside of GitHub an actions deploy key that will allow us to go ahead and deploy. I'm just going to put a dot in here for my current directory and force orphan true. And some things that we don't want to send up there. GitHub, that'll exclude the GitHub directory. So that sets that up. And now what we want to do is also, I think that's not correct. Forgot to use a stanza. Tell it version 4. This is a GitHub action that's going to deploy up to GitHub Pages. So let's go ahead and take care of that. And that looks good now. So that's going to be a shell script that it's going to execute. This is a simple bash script, so we're going to say I'm going to say npx. So first we want to go ahead and bundle that. and we want to direct it to this OpenAPI. Now -o tells it an output. I'm going to call it. So what's happening here is I'm telling it to continue that line. So I'm telling it to run the bundle command -o, and I'm going to output the consolidated specification into the root of the directory called sfg0a3. And now I'm going to say npx. And what's important about this command here is that we're telling it to go ahead and build the docs. We're giving it the source of the consolidated specification that we built on the previous line. And then we're telling it to output a file called index.html. And that's the HTML file that will be in the root of the directory. And that's the HTML file that will get picked up by Github Pages. So just to recap what we built here, we built this GitHub action here. That's going to run on Ubuntu latest, checks out the repository, sets up Node, installs the Redoc CLI, and then runs the lint test, make sure that everything goes right. And that's going to run when we create a PR. This is going to run when we push to the branch main. Again, it's going to check out the repository. It's going to go ahead and build the docs, deploy up to GitHub Pages using this GitHub action. This action is going to require us to have a deploy key in our secret. So that's going to have to be configured in the repository, and that's going to push to that directory. So let's go ahead and commit this. And go ahead and commit the files and push that up to the directory. So I've toggled over to GitHub. So just to recap, setting up this key is a two-step process. One, you need to add it as a deploy key, and then you need to take that key value and add it in as a repository secret. I'm intentionally not showing the key, but you need to go ahead and generate the key. I personally use 1Password, which will automatically generate the key for you and maintain it securely, something that you don't want to be tossing around, because this does give you the ability to write to the GitHub repository. As long as that is set up, we are good to go. And now if I come in here, so here's the GitHub Actions. This is the branch that we push to. So I'm going to go ahead and say compare pull requests. You can see here's the API linting checks. That's going to go ahead and run. You can see I toggled over into GitHub Actions. It's going to go through those steps, and it's going to run our lint test. So you can see that it came through, said our API description is valid. So now if we come back to our GitHub Actions, that is completed correctly. So we can see after a few moments that all the checks pass. So this goes ahead and takes care of that. The build did complete. I did have to hit refresh on it. It usually will go green on its own, but it's taking too long. Try refreshing. It might go ahead and go. And now the one thing that we do need to do is set up a branch called GitHub Pages. So I'm going to come here to the code before we go ahead and merge that. And I'm going to go to branches. So that's the working branch that we have. And let's go ahead and create a new branch. I'm going to call that GitHub Pages. And sourcing for main is fine. I'm going to go say create a new branch. See that we're getting all the stuff in here. We don't want all that on this. So let's go ahead. Definitely don't want the workflows on this. I'm going to say delete directory. This will all get handled by the GitHub Pages. So I'm just in GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to keep this branch clean. Deleting this just in case. I think the rest will be okay. I'm just double checking things. That should be fine for our purposes. So let's come back over here. Our pull requests, adding GitHub Actions. And now I'm going to go ahead and say merge pull request. So when I merge this should trigger the deploy. Now we can see that our merge request is in fact running inside of GitHub Actions. And we hit a failure, see what that is. And we have a permission denied. So that's easy enough to fix. So I'm going to pull the changes because we merged that branch, and then let's go and check that out. And I'm going to open up a terminal. Doesn't always pick it up. The file permissions don't seem to get picked up, but we did need to change that file permission. So I'm going to make a white space change to this. We'll jump back over to GitHub Pages. And this time you can see that it's actually running make. So basically I went to the command line, made that file executable. After making it executable, I made a white space change to push it, and we can see that we're getting a problem with the credentials. So let me troubleshoot that. Okay, so that took a minute to troubleshoot, and I think GitHub Copilot got me on that. So this value was set to GitHub token, and that affected how this GitHub action was authenticating with GitHub. It should be deploy key because I set up a deploy key. So I created an SSH public-private key pair, registered those with GitHub. So that's our deploy key. We're using an SSH key for that. And we're not using a GitHub token, but the deploy key. And so this has two different options, and I inadvertently, I think through Copilot, set that to a GitHub token, so it was changing the authentication with GitHub, and it was failing on that. So now if I come back over to Chrome, you can see here this did run as expected. It does go through all the steps that we thought it would as far as building the documentation, and then after this runs, because it's set up as GitHub Pages, we will get a second job to run. And this is built into GitHub Pages build and deployment, and it's going to come back and report the status. And then you can see here it's got the URL of the documentation, and it's my repository name, github.io, and then the repo that it's in, the Spring 6 REST API, and this is the baseline Redocly API documentation. So this is now updating. So if I change this, make a change to this documentation, it will automatically run through GitHub Actions and update the website. So if I make a change, and any changes that are pushed to the repo, the main branch of the repo, a few minutes, that will run through GitHub Actions and then be updated on the website.